Good afternoon, everyone. This is to inform you guys that we will be recording this afternoon's online forum.
SN Aboitiz Power, powering positive change for 14 years. And it began with a phone call. In 2006, the Aboitiz Group was looking to expand its power business. The privatization of the state's power assets was also underway. Then came a phone call from the Norwegian shipping partner of the Aboitiz Group. It conveyed that a Norwegian hydro company was interested to meet with the Aboitizes. And so began the partnership that significantly expanded the Aboitiz Group's hydropower portfolio and Norway's investment in the Philippines. SN Aboitiz Power is a Norwegian and Filipino joint venture between SN Power and Aboitiz Power. Aboitiz Power is the holding company of Aboitiz Group's investments in power generation, distribution, and retail electricity services. SN Power of Norway is a hydropower developer and independent power producer. In 2020, it was bought out by Scatec ASA, a Norwegian developer and provider of solar, wind, and hydropower as well as storage solutions. SNAP had acquired the Magat and the Ambuklao being a hydroelectric power plants in 2006 and 2007 respectively through public bidding. Only the power components of the facilities were privatized. The non-power components such as dams and spillways remain government-owned and mostly government-operated. Magat Dam is a multi-purpose dam used primarily for irrigation. Power generation for Magat hydropower depends on irrigation diversion requirement. For the Ambuklao and being a hydros located in Benguet, SNAP operates the spillway gates under normal conditions based on an operation and maintenance agreement. Ambuklao was under preservation and not operating at the time of privatization. Both Ambuklao and Binga underwent rehabilitation and upgrading. Binga is being operated remotely from Ambuklao. Straddling the province of Ifugao and Isabela is SNAP's biggest plant, Magat Hydro. Magat undertook a half-life refurbishment to ensure that it remains available throughout its lifespan. As impounding hydros, these three plants are designed to capture and store water inflow and use it to generate electricity when it is most needed. With a restructured power industry, SNAP built its business along ancillary services, spot trading, and contracting. SNAP had changed Magat's operations from a base load plant to a peaking plant. This led to greater flexibility in water use, minimal losses of spillage, and increased profitability. Magat was also the first power plant to offer and secure an ancillary services contract, a business offering that continues to this day. It also has contracts with customers. Ambuklao and Binga are also capable of and are providing AS. It also sells to the spot market and is partially contracted. For the past year, SNAP's power business centered on hydropower, but we have been taking opportunities to expand our RE portfolio. The first plant SNAP built is Maris Hydro, completed in 2017. Maris is a runoff river hydropower plant operated remotely from Magat. We piloted our first non-hydro project, the Magat Floating Solar, over the Magat Reservoir in 2019. We also started work on a battery energy storage system in Magat to boost our ancillary service offerings. SNAP has improved the operations of the plants, optimized water values, modernized the facilities, improved reliability and dependability, introduced quality systems, processes, and technologies, developed company culture, competencies, and strategic relationships towards profitability and sustainability. This may be our past, but the story continues. And though our history has many great highlights, many more are yet to come. So, as this story begins with a call, we end it for now with another. Come and be part of the Snap story.
Good afternoon to all of you. SN Aboitiz Power, or SNAP, is the leading renewable energy producer in the country, providing responsible energy that fosters growth, progress, and success of businesses and communities. And as part of its continuing commitment to power positive change, SNAP Group welcomes you to this year's first SNAP Conversations, focusing on 2024 economic outlook, projections, programs, and priorities. My name is Jose Luis Salud from the Legal Affairs team, and I am joined by my colleague, Jane Consolacion, for this afternoon session.
Hi, everyone. I am Jane from the Public Affairs team. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this episode of Snap Conversations, our very first for this year. Before we start, we have a couple of reminders. First, we encourage closing other applications not in use because that might be using your bandwidth. Second, let us all stay engaged throughout the webinar. Third, be open to share ideas and ask questions through our Slido link, which you should be seeing on your screens right now and in the description and the chat box. And lastly, I hope you guys participate, learn, and enjoy.
Today's Snap Conversation holds great significance. We have attendees from various business and industry sectors, government, schools, and universities, and of course from SNAP. Seeing the number of attendees that we have today, it is apparent that we are all eager to learn from our speakers. We are graced by the presence of representatives from both the public and private sectors, the National Economic and Development Authority, and the Bank of the Philippine Islands to discuss and provide us an overview of government plans, programs, policies, and national priorities for the year ahead, as well as economic forecasts, emerging industry trends, risks, and opportunities.
Yeah, super excited to be hosting this with you, Luis, today. And with the prospect of positive economic growth on the horizon, we are curious about how this would impact various sectors and industries. This is why today's Snap Conversations is relevant, and we'll be sure to provide useful insights for all of our attendees. So let's not wait any further to officially welcome you all. I am super honored to welcome Snap's President and CEO, Mr. Joseph S. Yu, for his welcome remarks.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Luis. Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to all of you who are joining us here today. I'm pleased to open the first Snap Conversations for 2024. The title of today's conversation is 2024 Economic Outlook, Projections, Programs, and Priorities. If you look at various economic outlooks, they all paint a promising picture for the Philippines. So despite existing challenges such as geopolitical tensions, inflation, financial stability concerns, and climate change, the development in the nation's economic landscape suggests positive growth in the Philippines, positioning us as one of the fastest growing economies in Southeast Asia. So at the heart of these conversations lies a fundamental question. Now, how can we navigate this economic advantage to our advantage, right? This economic landscape to our advantage. So today we aim to understand these complexities through insightful conversations. We have two esteemed guests with us here today. First of all, we have the Secretary of the National Economic Development Authority, or NEDA, Secretary Arsenio Balisacan. Welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts with us on the Philippine economic growth prospects and our priorities as a country. Secretary Pansakan will be followed by Mr. June Neri of PTI. Sir June is an institution in SNAP, and he's here to share with us his thoughts on the economic and market forecasts and projections. So today's conversation will offer a unique opportunity for us to gain insight for business assessments and projections to help us and enable us to manage risks more effectively and to help us chart a course towards sustainable success. And that's why at SNAP, we are very committed to fostering informed discussions on key issues. Our primary objective here in SNAP Conversations has always been to support our valuable customers and partners in their endeavors by shedding light on key challenges and opportunities within the power sector and beyond. So on that note, I look forward to learning from our distinguished speakers, and I am confident that we will discover new insights and ideas that will sustain our efforts towards economic growth. Thank you again to all our speakers and to all our participants who are joining us today. Welcome once again, and I wish you all a highly successful forum. Let the conversations begin.
All right. Thank you so much, Joseph. Let the conversations begin. I hope everyone is excited to hear from our esteemed speakers for today. They will help us, in Joseph's words, will chart our way towards sustainable success.
We shall dive into our first speaker soon. But before that, we would like to remind you that you may ask questions or give suggestions through the Slido. We shall have our Q&A portion after each speaker. Okay, let me introduce to you our first speaker this afternoon, who will provide insights on the Philippines' economic growth prospects and priorities for the year ahead. Our first speaker is an economist with extensive development policy, governance, and administration expertise acquired from over 35 years of professional work as a government official, non-governmental organizational executive, economic advisor, researcher, professor, and consultant for numerous development agencies and intergovernmental organizations. A former economics professor at the University of the Philippines for 3 decades, he is presently a cabinet member of the Philippine government, serving as Secretary of the National Economic and Development Authority, a post he had previously held from 2012 to 2016. He also served as the inaugural chairperson and chief executive of the Philippine Competition Commission from 2016 to 2022. In his current role as NEDA Secretary, he concurrently chairs the governing boards of various state agencies, including the Philippine Statistics Authority, Philippine Institute for Development Studies, Public-Private Partnership Center, Development Academy of the Philippines, Commission on Population and Development, and Philippine Center for Economic Development. Everyone, please join me in welcoming NEDA Secretary, Dr. Arsenio Balisacan.
Thank you for the very kind introduction. Okay. Esteemed members of the various chambers of commerce and associations of the business community, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you to the SN Aboitiz Power Group for this exciting opportunity to speak before all of you. Today, I am pleased to share the Marcos administration's plans, priorities, and the country's economic growth and outlook prospects for 2024. In its first year and a half, the government has implemented programs and policies to ignite socioeconomic transformation and secure the growth momentum for the medium term. This year, we aim to sustain our progress and broaden the country's economic possibilities even further. To start, Let me go through some macroeconomic indicators quickly. Though I know some of you are already familiar with these numbers. Many of you have been or have seen the slides from my previous presentations in the last few months, I believe. First, the Philippine economy grew by 5.6% in the previous year, though the growth rate fell short of the government's target of 6 to 7% for the whole year. Comparatively, the Philippines is still, as noted earlier, among the fastest growing major economies in Asia, second only to India. Admittedly, even with the external headwinds, we could have done better without the combined impact of high domestic inflation, high interest rates, and to some extent, government underspending. Consumption on the demand side and services on the supply side continue to fuel our economic growth. They account for around 3/4 of gross domestic product or GDP growth in the last 2 years. The external sector remained a challenge as exports of goods was much lower relative to the imports of goods, the growth of the imports of goods and services. Managing inflation was one of the government's top priorities in 2023, as rising food prices remained one of our significant economic challenges. The average inflation rate was 6%, above the 2023 target of 2.5% to 4.5%. For 2024, however, public and private sector projections are pointing to slower inflation. I'll come back to that later. Last month, it was recorded at 2.8% and fell within the government's target range. Encouragingly, I should note that the decrease can be attributed to the easing of food inflation, though rice inflation remains high. In assessing the quality of our economy's growth, we can examine our labor market indicators. In December 2023, the unemployment rate fell to 3.1%, lower than the 4.3% figure of December 2022. And historically, since we started compiling comparable data in 2005, this is the lowest we have observed since 2005. The underemployment rate also fell to 11.9%, an improvement from the 12.6% recorded in the same period of the previous year. Over the years, sound macroeconomic fundamentals were instrumental in supporting the country's growth. In 2023, we have sought to reduce our debt and deficit to GDP ratios to expand our fiscal space. The latest figures show that debt as a proportion to total GDP decreased to 60.2%, while the deficit eased to 5.7%. Despite a most challenging year in 2023, the government continued with the plans and strategies in the Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028, the country's development blueprint for achieving rapid, sustained, and inclusive economic growth. The PDP identifies the targets that are consistent with this objective, even as we are presently studying the relevant domestic and external factors that we must consider in our targets and assumptions. The economic team, our economic team, remains positive. For 2024, we aim for a gross domestic product or GDP growth rate of 6.5% to 7.5%. Although I must say that we are reviewing this current target, taking into consideration the data that are emerging, as well as the experiences we had last year. With food and overall inflation falling within our desired band of 2 to 4%. We see our gross national income per capita grow significantly with upper middle income country status within reach by 2025. We can look forward to continuing the encouraging trends we have seen in our labor market, especially underemployment, with the government's sustained push to generate high-quality employment opportunities through more significant investments and worker upskilling. In particular, we aim to progressively raise the share of wage and salaried workers in our economy by continuously improving labor market conditions. Our positive view is also founded on our sound macroeconomic fundamentals, which we shall maintain. We recognize that we will need to push for revenue-generating measures to expand our fiscal space and ensure that the size of our government deficit and public debt relative to our GDP continue their downward trajectory. We identify several domestic and external risks to our growth. On the home front, and concerning the supply side, the highly infectious animal diseases such as the African swine fever, prolonged droughts or dry spells, and floods associated with El Nino and La Nina weather phenomena risk pushing food inflation upward. On the other hand, demand-side risks include the limited absorptive capacities of implementing agencies and local government units, which may cause deviations from the planned spending targets outlined in our medium-term fiscal framework. As an open economy, we remain vulnerable to several global factors. First, anemic global economic growth, particularly in the country's major trading partners, implies muted export growth on the horizon. Second, the reemergence of restrictive trade policies of key food exporting countries may exert upward pressure or price pressure in the global food markets, particularly for food staples. Third, geopolitical tensions and conflicts may disrupt the flow of essential goods along supply chains. And fourth, uncertainties in the policy environment abound due to the general elections in major economies this year. Despite this risk, we share the optimism of observers with a keen interest in the Philippine economy. Prospects for the Philippines remain among the brightest in our region. As you can see from the table, plus on screen, the Philippines is expected to outperform its neighbors this year. If, and I should emphasize this, we can translate the lessons we have learned in the past year into decisive, committed, and programmatic actions. The Philippine Development Report, or PDR 2023, provides a comprehensive review of the country's progress and the lessons learned from implementing the PDP 2023 to 2028 since its formulation. Realizing our desired outcomes requires us to operationalize and implement the strategies under the development and transformation agenda effectively. The lessons learned in 2023 will allow us to sharpen the effectiveness of the strategies, which in turn will improve our chances of achieving our targets in the short and medium term, particularly on food security, learning recovery, public-private partnerships, and fiscal consolidation. Please allow me to go through each of these lessons in more detail. First, we must reinforce our fiscal foundations. This year, one of the government's priorities is to improve tax administration by implementing the Ease of Paying Taxes Act and expanding the use of digital channels in collecting agencies. In coordination with Congress, we are also working on new revenue-generating measures that will expand our fiscal space and allow us to fund projects and initiatives to sustain economic growth. Further, the government is working on streamlining the bureaucracy and ensuring it can address new strategic priorities through the more effective deployment of resources. Second, even as we continue building our infrastructure, we shall endeavor to recover COVID-19 associated learning losses and invest in human capital as a foundation for a globally competitive workforce. In education, we must pursue greater involvement of LGUs, civil society, and the private sector in resolving fundamental constraints such as shortages of classrooms, teaching staff, and administrative workforce. Learning camps and support allowances will accelerate learning recovery and address the issue of student absence. Crucially, President Marcos has given a directive to devote more resources and expand the coverage of the Pantawid Pamilya Filipino program, or for PEACE, to help avoid stunting and improve the long-term health outcomes of our children. We will manage inflation by ensuring that food is available, accessible, and affordable. The government is accelerating its efforts and carry its much needed food production and post-production investments across all supply chain segments. When warranted, as when deficits in food production are anticipated, the government must employ strategic trade policy to protect the purchasing power of Filipinos, especially the poor. Fourth, the government will ramp up the Pambansang Pabahay para sa Pilipino, or 4PH program, to enhance Filipino households' access to affordable housing. With housing and supporting industries identified as significant growth drivers, the government support for the program will include ensuring the availability and affordability of construction materials, strengthening skills training for our workers, fast-tracking the identification of potential beneficiaries and land, and streamlining the process for securing permits to minimize delays in implementation. Finally, we'll work to ensure a more progressive and accessible government. Through digitalization, we aim to provide high quality and efficient government services. We'll enhance the alignment of our programs and initiatives through the interagency coordination and strengthen the links between the various stages of the policymaking cycle, from planning to budgeting and implementation, all the way to monitoring and evaluation. Having identified these lessons and action points, I will highlight some of the results of ongoing initiatives that interest you as members of the business community and private sector. The Marcos administration, through the NEDA board, continues to evaluate, approve, and roll out the 198 infrastructure flagship projects, or IFPs, worth a combined value of 8.79 or 79 trillion pesos, or approximately 158 billion US dollars. Chaired by the President, the NEDA board will soon update this list when it meets next week, as implementing agencies have undertaken reviews of their portfolios and identified projects for priority funding and execution. NEDA takes this monitoring role seriously by regularly checking on the progress of these IFPs. We provide such updates directly to the President and Cabinet members and coordinate key decision-maker actions to expedite processes and shorten project approval and delivery timelines. For 2024, some ongoing projects we expect to complete this year include those improving connectivity and our water resources, as you can see on your screens. We invite you to use the IFP dashboard on the NEDA website as your monitoring tool to see the latest status of these projects. As the Marcos administration works toward realizing these IFPs, we recognize, in particular, the indispensable role of the private sector in providing affordable and reliable power as a fundamental enabler of industrialization and development. We must ensure that our energy sector can cater to the increasing demand of our growing economy, or else risk discouraging investments in sectors and industries that produce high quality employment, such as manufacturing. The reforms and initiatives shown on the screen aim to enable even more significant private sector investments in our energy sector. Government actions aim to encourage competition, enhance system reliability, and reduce risk, remove bureaucratic roadblocks to protect execution or project execution, accelerate investments in transmission and backbone infrastructure, facilitate an optimal energy transition to renewables, and diversify our energy portfolio to help shield the economy from volatility at the global level. These efforts, spearheaded by the Department of Energy and other government agencies, will be critical toward addressing this most binding constraint to investment. Speaking of the private sector, public-private partnerships or PPPs remain a crucial driver for sustained spending on physical and social infrastructure, enhancing productivity and boosting the country's competitiveness. As of February 2024, 184 projects valued at approximately 47.9 billion US dollars are underway. Additionally, 117 projects across various sectors worth about 43.5 billion US dollars are in the PPP pipeline. You may be pleased to know that meetings of the NEDA board, chaired by the president, the platform where we approve major projects after undergoing rigorous evaluation, are held every month, the most frequent in our recent history. The Marcos administration has now cut the average processing time for big ticket PPPs to half the prescribed maximum length, a testament to its commitment to its infrastructure transformation strategy. As we have pushed hard to approve major projects in 2022 and 2023, we'll work towards securing more approvals of additional PPP projects in the health and transportation sectors this year. Among these projects include the Hemodialysis Center project in the Cagayan Valley Medical Center, the UPPGH Diliman project, and game-changing public transportation projects such as the EDSA busway, as well as the operations and maintenance, or O&M, of the Metro Manila subway and the North-South Commuter Railway. We'll ensure that even before we finish the construction of these projects, the necessary management systems are primed and ready to go so that the riding public can enjoy these services as soon as possible. We must continue the momentum to realize the full potential of our infrastructure drive. Looking further to 2025, we will remain focused on connectivity infrastructure, particularly for transportation and road projects. Most of these are in the critical development or preparatory phase to assess its project's viability. With the passage of the landmark Public-Private Partnership Code, or PPP Code, last December 2023, we expect to release the implementing rules and regulations, or IRR, according to schedule. With the interim guidelines on PPP projects established and through regular consultations with stakeholders, the PPP Governing Board aims to finalize and publish the approved IRR by March 2022, within the 90 days provided by the law. By firming up this policy framework, we expect even greater interest in PPPs in the years to come. In the In the past year and a half, key policies and reforms have been enacted to create a more enabling regulatory and policy environment for investments. On the legislative front, NEDA is also advocating for the implementation of next-generation reforms that will further enable the transformation of our production sectors and promote sustained and inclusive growth. The Legislative Executive Development Advisory Council, or LEDAC, chaired by the President with NEDA as the Secretariat, coordinates the endorsement and passage of essential legislative solutions to address long-standing structural challenges in critical industries. As a member of the economic team, NEDA supports the Department of Finance in its efforts to have priority fiscal measures passed in 2024 to meet the targets set forth in the medium-term fiscal framework. Among these measures are the imposition of VAT and digital service providers, which levels the playing field between domestic and foreign players in this industry. The Passive Income and Financial Intermediary Taxation Act, also known as PFITA, or Package 4 of the Comprehensive Tax Reform Program, which shall simplify taxation in financial transactions involving passive income and financial instruments. Another measure involves imposing excise taxes on single-use plastics to address the problem of plastic waste mismanagement while generating revenue for the government. Finally, rationalizing the mining fiscal regime will ensure that as the sector expands, the Filipino people will benefit from public services financed by the revenues generated from mining. Establishing the Department of Water Resources is also one of NEDA's priority bills for this year. Considering the challenges aggravated by climate change, this bill aims to address the lack of basic water infrastructure and prioritize the utilization, exploitation, development, and protection of resources to meet increasing demands. The bill seeks to address the fragmentation of water resource governance. The Open Access in Data Transmission Bill is another priority bill of NEDA that falls within the LEDAC's common legislative agenda. The bill's primary objective is to close the digital divide by removing barriers to competition along the supply chain and fostering ICT infrastructure development to spur more economic opportunities. As I conclude, let me assure you that the government is acting urgently to hasten the country's progress toward a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient society. Further, we value your ongoing involvement in this journey. We hope that investors as yourselves take part in the daunting but significant and important task of nation building. Despite the many challenges ahead, we look forward to a brighter tomorrow, united and encouraged by President Marcos' envisioned transformation toward a bagong Pilipinas or new Philippines. If you wish to know more, please scan the QR codes at the screen to access the Philippine Development Plan and the Philippine Development Report 2023. Thank you. Once again, thank you for your time and this opportunity to share my thoughts. I look forward to the discussion ahead. Good day to us all.
Thank you so much, Secretary, for this insightful presentation that for sure has our audiences thinking about our indispensable and, like you said, daunting role in enabling nation building and sustainable development, especially for SNAP, which is a renewable energy and power generation company. Thank you, sir. At this point, we will be accommodating some questions from the audience. So to those of you who haven't submitted, again, you may send your questions, suggestions, and comments via Slido. For now, allow me to briefly introduce our moderator for our Q&A. He is a lawyer with extensive experience in stakeholder engagement, corporate social responsibility, and strategy development, with over 20 years under his belt in the power industry. Since joining SN Aboitiz Power in 2008, He has been instrumental in transitioning state-owned assets into SNAP hydroelectric power plants focused on community development and employee engagement. As Vice President for Corporate Affairs, he helped shape SNAP's public affairs, sustainability, and regulatory agenda. And now, in his current role, he oversees optimizing SNAP's operations, covering asset management, information systems, procurement and supply chain, legal and regulatory affairs, compliance, reputation management, CSR, and sustainability. So much. Everyone is part of his team. Myself, I am proud and honored to turn you over to SNAP's Chief Operations Officer, Attorney Mike Casillas.
Thank you very much, Jane. And first and foremost, I would like to thank Secretary Balisacan for honoring us with his presence and his insights on the latest update, no, on our economic status and development in the country. Mr. Secretary, maraming salamat po sa inyong pagdalo at it is an honor to actually have you and to have heard personally from you what the administration and NEDA is doing to aid in the acceleration of economic development in the country. If you allow me, Mr. Secretary, we have some questions from the audience as well as from our partners here. And maybe I'll shoot off ahead. I didn't see it, but there is a question here regarding a proposed 100 peso across the board increase on the minimum wage, I believe. Is this something that the government is studying right now, and how do you see this affecting our economic growth in the meantime if this is implemented?
Yes, thank you. Well, our position at NEDA is that it's not the right time. You see, we are trying to we're working very hard to sustain the momentum in reducing inflation to the target of 2 to 4%. And we don't want the last thing we want is to reverse those gains that we have achieved over the last several months. No, for sure, the proposed 100 wage hike would negatively impact on the inflation prospect that I just mentioned. Our GDP, our estimate show that GDP growth could be hit negatively. If I understand, if I have remember the number, it's something like 0.1 to 2.5 reduction in percentage point, no, reduction in GDP, depending on how it is implemented. Yeah. Let me access my okay. Unemployment. So yeah, 0.1 to 0.5. If it the lower number assumes that the wage hike will only apply to minimum wage earners. But if there is a cascading effect of that to other workers, then it could go as high as 0.5 percentage point reduction in our GDP. That's quite substantial. The impact on unemployment would be also as we have seen in our presentation. We are reaching. We have one of the achievements of this administration is to reduce that unemployment rate to historically low levels since 2005. No, as of the December figure. And we would want to sustain that, and we would want to even get improve the quality of that the employment generated. And so the 100 peso wage hike could impact negatively on the unemployment rate, raising that unemployment number from 0.2 to 0.7 percentage point. That's quite substantial. That will amount to something like 100,000 to 340,000 additional unemployed people. And the inflation rate, as I said earlier, could be affected negatively. That the inflation could the inflation that would be induced by the wage hike could run from 0.2 to 0.8 percentage point. Again, depending on how that the hike is eventually employed. We are not saying that we are against any increases in wages. In fact, we are, and that we would want improvement in wages, but we would rather have those wages negotiated at the regional level, because we have established regional tripartite discussions between government, firms, and workers, and the situations across the country are so different, vary so much, and so allowing those negotiations to take place at at the regional levels would get them take into account those significant differences in the labor market conditions and economic conditions in those areas. So, as in the past several years now, we have had those increases in wages realized at the level of tripartite discussions.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that valuable insight, Mr. Secretary. In fact, whenever the discussions on wage and benefits come in, like there's always an emotional pull to actually request for more. But as you have elucidated right now, there's a significant impact on unemployment, on inflation, right, and on the effect overall to the economy, even with a 100 peso minimum wage increase across the board. So thank you for that insight. And I guess that's something that needs to be carefully studied, as you have said, and to sort of find for other ways or means to actually effect this type of increases without unduly prejudicing the entire economy. There's one of the things that you presented earlier, Mr. Secretary, is about the cutting in half of the processing time for PPP projects or approval of infra projects under the Marcos administration. And this is, I think, is a very, very significant accomplishment. And we would like to congratulate you and laud the efforts of NEDA in really focusing on the bottlenecks on this type of project and infra approval. So maybe in connection with that, you've shown a lot of the potential PPP projects and the infra projects that had been approved and is currently in the pipeline. But can you give us probably a very brief, picture of what the president really wants in terms of infrastructure development? What will be the key focus on infrastructure development, and how you believe this type of infrastructure projects or even PPP projects will drive, in increasing our economic activity and overall achieving economic growth?
As you well know, the infrastructure deficits run across areas of the economy, sectors of the of the economy, and across space of our geography. But most of our infrastructure projects in the pipeline are of the physical connectivity types, the roads, the highways, the railways, including subway, and that represents about 80% of the total cost that I mentioned earlier, the 8.7 9 trillion pesos, no? Almost 80% of that are physical connectivity. That's the other item are pertain to water resources, no? Water, particularly water supply, water treatment facilities, and so on. And there are also infrastructure projects for agriculture, health, digital connectivity, other infrastructure, particularly power and energy. Now, the thing about power and energy is much of that already is in the private sector. And while there may still be PPP in the power and energy, a lot of that is really already driven by private sector. But there's are a lot of opportunities in connectivity, and housing is also another major area that we are focusing on because the huge backlog in housing, and we have made housing the Pabahay program of government as a major push in this administration.
Mr. Secretary, you mentioned the second largest classification of projects right now, infra projects right now, is really in water, right? And bulk of this probably is in the water treatment portion. But together with the creation of the Department of Water very recently, and the trust towards increasing the level of water infrastructure in the country. What are the main trust of government, and what is NEDA doing right now in terms of identifying water projects that are really going to be significant in terms of its contribution both to the economic development as well as the increase in access by communities and society on these water projects, whether it's in agriculture or domestic water supply. So how do you see this policy going and the potential for this type of infrastructure projects moving ahead?
Yeah, there's the access to quality water remains a major problem for our people, particularly the lower income groups and those outside of metropolises like Metro Manila. The government has been identifying through our DNR, which is at the moment is the one coordinating the water program through an office specially created to coordinate those programs across the different agencies while we are waiting for the creation of that Department of Water. No, so they have presented to us a week ago a kind of a master plan already of where the water sources are and how they interface with existing infrastructure and to what extent they can be viable for PPP. So we're opening this up for public-private partnership as well. So I think that there's the indications are that there are a lot of interest for the private sector to get involved in water development through PPP arrangements. So we expect to see many of these coming as we move forward.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. As you are aware, our company, SN Aboitiz Power, is in the business of hydropower, and we would like to inform you that as early as last year, in the middle of last year, we're already experiencing a bit of slowdown or a decrease in inflow in our reservoir, especially the one in North Luzon, the one in Isabela, which is Imagat. And we're quite excited about seeing that in your update that a lot of the infrastructure projects that have been being approved and is now in the pipelines really on water, because we believe, especially in Isabela, for example, where we're in the middle, we're in the early months of the summer, in fact. But during the last 3 months, starting in December, we have really seen a very significant decrease in inflow due to the El Nino phenomenon. That water infrastructure will have to be prioritized, particularly additional water storages, as well as reservoir for both domestic and irrigation uses. And in fact, one of the things that we're very keen to help government on is really to help develop this, and to be open. If this is to be opened up to the private sector, we are really interested in looking at how we can help increase the overall economic benefit justification for these type of projects, to include not just domestic water, irrigation, but also power, and significantly in power, because this is really a cheap renewable source of energy. So
I think what we've been lacking is the development of dams, no? Not
right.
just big dams, but also water impounding facilities. Many times it's been pointed out that water is not our problem, right? I mean, it's the availability is there, but how to make that accessible for ordinary people, that's the problem, because we have not been investing in water development, especially in the distribution system, and also as well as in sourcing the water, and even worse in water treatment, sewerage treatment, where the investment is. So there's a lot of investment opportunities out there, and the way we see it, the only way to get to address this acute shortages is to get the private sector come in. We do realize that you can't count at this time government, because you have very high the fiscal space limited. No matter how much more you can try to increase revenues, whether it's tax measures or new tax measures or not, but with the backlog in infrastructure, we simply have to bring in the private sector taking in more an active role. That's why in this administration we have moved to revive and implement aggressively public-private partnerships. And we are looking at PPPs in practically all areas of infrastructure development.
Thank you very much for that insight, Mr. Secretary. There's another matter that probably we want to find out from the NETA perspective on how the government plans to actually address this. There are two, in terms of the power development in the country, there are two key aspects of it, right? Especially with the renewable energy law now that's driving the construction and development of renewable energy facilities. But one thing that we have encountered as of late, right, is that there's a need for a coordinated effort by government and the private sector. In particular, here is really the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, to sort of coordinate and align the transmission development programs to actually for us to be able to fully exploit and utilize the renewable energy potential, as well as the corridors that allows for greater contribution towards energy security. Is NEDA part of this effort in terms of looking at the overall economic impact of delayed transmission projects and projects that should have facilitated this type of investment in energy? And then the other aspect of that, coupled with the development of power, really is the concerns on how the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, and if you're aware, the IPRA law with the Indigenous peoples are actually, if there's already a study on the opportunities that were lost, in the very protracted and complex process of securing indigenous people's rights approval in some project areas that we want to go into, not only power, but generally, whether it's in mining, infrastructure development, water development, the impact of the implication and the implementation of the IPRA law to the economic development. Probably two things. Again, transmission as part of a strategy towards economic development, and then the impact of the IPRA law in terms of the opportunities that would have potentially been lost, right, due to the protracted implementation of this law.
Yes, I've been involved in all the discussion, most of the discussions, and particularly in the broader issues and the role of the energy infrastructure for development. I'm very aware of this issue, of the issues and the transmission and the issues of infrastructure development, securing approvals, including, approvals from the indigenous people communities. And there have been a number of meetings that have happened recently, no less than, coordinated by the Office of the Executive Secretary to address many of these issues. This don't impact only on energy, it also impact on our ability to for example, take advantage of our geographic position as a mining. We have so much resources that are needed by the current states of technologies, these critical minerals that are used in green energies, green technologies, and yet our many of our rules, regulations, and even laws, prevent us from taking advantage of those opportunities. So we have all these stranded resources, stranded power, to stranded mines, stranded, name it. It's and even so we actually have a draft EO being studied at the Office of the Executive Secretary, the Office of the President, to address this regulatory issues in the approval of permits, approval of infrastructure projects, including issuance of permits by LGUs, by regulatory agencies, and the intention is to speed up the process, make those the application process as transparent as possible, and ensure that the critical projects, especially national government projects, are not delayed, or their implementation is not delayed. So we have that. We have been. That's part of the NEDA board works, and that has already gone to the president. The president has asked our legal at the Office of the President to look at the draft EO, and so hopefully that will be issued soon, and that will help us, speed up the implementation of infrastructure projects, including
transmission
towers, and both for telecom and for power for electricity.
Well, it's good to know, Mr. Secretary, that these issues, and probably these are really the core of development infra and other project issues that really goes into some of the challenges that developers and the private sector are facing, and not just the private sector, even government is facing, because some of these projects are actually led by government, right? And I think We have a lot of questions, and we want to pick your mind, Mr. Secretary, but I think it's about time to actually wrap up. But before we do that, maybe any final words on how NEDA and this administration is seeing the benefits and the programs on economic development really translate into actual benefits to the people and the society in general. Any words on that, Mr. Secretary?
Yeah, we really would want at the end of the day, we want rapid growth, we want high growth, but a growth that is meaningful for every Filipino. And so we want that growth to be felt by everyone, that it's an inclusive growth, meaning every Filipino should benefit from that growth. And only then can we assure our people that that growth will be sustainable in the long term. Because any growth that is not is not inclusive, that it only polarizes our society even more, is not likely going to bring us anywhere or any far. So our objective in the medium term is to get our economy closer to our neighbors, because they have left us, many of them have left us far away, and we need to catch up with them. And so the effort of this administration in the 6th year of its term is to speed up that process of socioeconomic transformation, so that we can join eventually our neighbors in this region in that level of prosperity.
Very well said. And again, our warmest thanks and deep appreciation for your participation and sharing of your insights and really new information that gives us confidence that our path towards economic development is well managed through you, Secretary Balisacan. Maraming salamat po for your time, and good afternoon, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary Balisacan and Attorney Mike. A growth that is not inclusive won't get us very far. Thank you so much for that insightful exchange. Passing the floor over to Luis.
Luis, in video.
Yeah. Secretary Balisacan, please stay put as we virtually hand over the Certificate of Appreciation. SN Aboitiz Power Group awards the Certificate of Appreciation to Dr. Arsenio Balisacan for sharing his valuable expertise and knowledge during the SNAP Conversations 2024 Economic Outlook, Projections, Programs, and Priorities, given this 22nd of February 2024, signed by SNAP's Vice President, Mr. SN Fenomeno, and SNAP's President and CEO, Mr. Joseph S. Yu. Again, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Round of applause, please, for our first speaker. All right, so moving on to our next speaker, allow me to introduce him. He will be discussing key insights on economic and market forecasts for the next 12 months. Our next speaker is the lead economist of the Bank of the Philippine Islands, or BPI. Before joining BPI, our speaker served as an economics and banking sector analyst for a former monetary board member, was a consultant at the ADB, and a lecturer on monetary and fiscal policy at the University of Asia and the Pacific. He leads a team that consistently ranks at the top of surveys for analysts conducted by Bloomberg, Asia Money, and The Asset. Our speaker was also ranked #1 among local economists by the Department of Finance as having the most accurate gross domestic product, or GDP, growth projections from 2016 to 2018. He was the president of the Philippine Economic Society in 2020, and more recently, he was ranked #2 best local currency bond individual for research in the Asset Benchmark Research Awards 2022. Guests and colleagues, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome BPI's lead economist, Mr. Emilio Neri Jr.
Thanks so much, Jane. I hope all of you can hear me.
Yes, clear, sir.
Yeah, so I'll try to share my screen now. And please confirm if it's up and running.
Up and running, sir.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you again for that very kind introduction. And also, I'd like to thank again the entire SNAP team for inviting us for the third year in a row. Very happy to always share our ideas, our thoughts to the group. By the way, before I begin, let me just inform everyone that it's not just news in the room for BPI. We have our team members from the institutional banking group as well as from our foreign exchange team. Albina Antonio is here, and I think I have Mons Siruano just entering the room. So if there's anything that we can do for you, just reach out to our colleagues who are with us today. So, okay, so if you see my screen, let me begin with my presentation again. Thanks. We've entitled our presentation as such, Ready to Buck the 2024 Trends. So the question is about how well the Philippines will do vis-a-vis the rest of not just the world, but maybe vis-a-vis the rest of Southeast Asia. And I just wanted to show this table of growth forecasts for some very, very important or very crucial parts of the global economy. And you will note that for the G7 economies, the IMF is expecting and ADB are actually expecting a slowdown from 1.5% growth to 1.2%. If you look at developing Asia, which includes the Philippines, there's also an expected slowdown from about 5.2 to 4.8%. But if you look at the ASEAN, the truth is the forecasters are expecting an acceleration, and this acceleration includes the expectation that the Philippines will actually be one of the main drivers of this acceleration. So this is what we mean by bucking the trend in 2024. So even the IMF agrees, even the ADB agrees that both the ASEAN and the Philippines are likely to outperform the global economy this year. Of course, a key assumption that we have, or our central scenario for this year and next year, is that the policy tightening that has been carried out by major central banks and even our own central banks beginning in 2022 will not just end, but may actually be reversed towards the second semester of this year and some more in 2025. But it's very clear in the chart that we're showing here that while we may see an easing of policy settings from today's 5.5% in the US, for example, to 4% by the end of 2025. Historically, 4% is still quite elevated. At least over the last 15 years, a 4% policy rate in the US is not yet considered very, very low. It's still quite high. That's why the phrase higher for longer actually still applies for the next 2 years in our central scenario. So this soft landing outlook, where the US is now expected, after having managed inflation fairly well, to start reducing their interest rates. The truth is there are quite a lot of challenges that can actually disrupt this central scenario. One of them, for example, is this challenges of growth for China, and in particular, declining asset prices and deflation, falling prices being experienced by some parts of China. This could actually disrupt. If this continues and this happens in other parts of the world, this may actually threaten our central scenario of a soft landing. And actually, to put it in a rather, I guess, integrative framework, these are the three major challenges that keep or are likely to keep supply, supply constraints, a continuing challenge for the global economy. So they are namely geopolitical trade tensions, climate change, and COVID-19. These elements are expected to continue to threaten our central scenario. So I'm sure you're all familiar with all these three challenges. So let me just highlight a few. The U.S. will be having its national elections later this year, and if Mr. Trump wins once more, that could imply more protectionism in several industries. That could imply pulling out of the Russia-Ukraine war, and that will have some very important implications on the supply of coal, the supply of fertilizers, the supply of many other commodities. As far as climate change is concerned, of course, we all know the energy transition, and you are probably a bit more, this is really your expertise more than ours. But for the Philippines and some economies here in Southeast Asia, it's really the El Nino, which is being watched very closely, and how it can affect commodity prices, specifically grains prices, especially since elections are being held in many parts of the region, including India, where because of the elections, they are not that excited to export basmati rice. And then, of course, finally, COVID-19 continues to have a lingering impact on us. It has changed our habits, in particular, the property sector in the Philippines, the excess supply of office space, also because of the exit of POGOs, is making it more challenging for economies like ours. And we've heard from the Mr. Secretary himself earlier about the need to address all of these challenges moving forward. But really, in the US, you can see that inflation has remained rather persistent, and particularly housing inflation, which is shown by the orange portion, remains very sticky. It has slowed down very gradually, and if actually this continues, we could enter what could be a no landing scenario instead of a soft landing scenario for the global economy. You can see from this chart that while inflation has peaked and some economies like China have seen declining prices, we are seeing a persistently elevated price environment in some major economies, which could keep inflation from returning to target before the end of this year and even through 2025. And that would be what we call or refer to as a no landing scenario, where if inflation persists and growth remains very strong, no rate cuts are delivered by the US, that can ultimately lead to a hard landing scenario. If interest rates are kept high for very long, we could actually end up in a hard landing scenario. So again, while our central scenario is for soft landing to be enjoyed by the global economy, by the US economy, we cannot completely rule out all of these, or the risk of either no landing and an even more severe hard landing scenario. Okay, but again, we're very hopeful, and hopefully by the second semester of this year, the US can really start reducing interest rates. Okay, so now we zero in on the Philippines. And again, I think very consistent with the presentation of the Secretary earlier. Looks like the Philippines is ready to buck the trend again this year. And our optimism really is very conditional on inflation. Inflation, we believe, will finally fall within the BSP target in 2024 after 5.8 in 2022 and 6% last year. Inflation this year looks to be more likely to fall within the 2 to 4% target of the BSP. And to us, this means consumers in the Philippines will finally be able to avoid this sticker shock, no? This very rapid increases in prices that it has experienced the last 2 years. You can just imagine we managed to see household consumption grow by more than 5%, despite high inflation, despite a policy rate at 6.5%, no? And all the other challenges that our secretary mentioned earlier. Finally, you know, after so many months, so many quarters, the Philippines is no longer the valedictorian in the inflation space, no? It looks like we will now be just in the middle of the pack as far as inflation is concerned. And again, this will probably entail very good news for growth for the rest of, well, for most of this year. So again, just reflashing, and again, the secretary has already flashed this. After Thailand released the GDP numbers last week, we can now validate that the Philippines is one of the fastest or among the biggest economies of Southeast Asia. We managed to post the fastest growth, and this despite government actually contributing very little to growth. No? For the whole of last year, government only spent 0.4% more than 2022. So that's really an underperformance that if they had only spent a little bit more, would have allowed the economy to grow at 6% or higher. No? So it's not essentially true that the policy hikes were behind the slowdown. It was largely because of this very sharp slowdown in government outlays. No? The secretary also talked about the external environment not being very friendly. As you can see, our exports were only up by 1.6%. No? That's a deterioration from the full year growth rate of almost 11% last year. So really, if we look at the sources of the slowdown last year, it is quite clear that the rate hikes have had very little impact on negative impact on growth. No? In fact, if you look at the airline industry, they actually purchased almost 400% more aircraft in the latter part of last year. No? Despite the high borrowing rates, they found it feasible to be expanding their businesses in response to growing demand, existing demand, as well as anticipation of improving demand for travel. So just our OFWs alone are moving very quickly to fill in jobs in many parts of the world. Something like 2.3 million Filipinos were deployed last year, and I'll show you a graph on that later on. No? So I guess the key takeaway is the higher interest rate environment that we're experiencing isn't exactly causing investors to slow down on their spending. Maybe some parts of the property sector, again, because of office space being in excess. Many parts of the property sector are actually doing well. Residential property outside Metro Manila is seeing prices go up. Demand continues to be strong, and this is probably because of the work from home habit that many of our workers have learned to carry out, no? After the pandemic. Also, you can see in this chart that despite the rapid rate hikes of the BSP, the unemployment rate actually managed to hit a new record low. So tells you a lot about how it's really demand that the policy rate hikes have been affecting, not so much the production and employment opportunities. No? Also, you can see from this slide that I'm showing you right now that there is a misconception that demand weakened last year, as shown by falling imports. Now, you can see from the chart on the left that import numbers fell from 137 billion to 126 billion. No? But the truth is, this is in terms of value only. This is because of lower coal prices, lower oil prices, lower prices of so many commodities. In volume terms, Filipinos still consumed more in 2023 than in 2022. No? In terms of units, Filipinos continued to actually have bigger demand in 2023 compared to 2022. So it's a misconception that demand has shrunk or has actually receded because of high policy rates. No? Another source of optimism we have going forward and industries that we think will continue to be strong in the coming years will still be in the high contact sector. So talk about the arts and entertainment industry, construction, travel, all of these sectors that really got hurt during the pandemic. They're still making up for what they lost in 2020 and 2021. So expect them to even be revitalized further in 2024 as inflation goes down, as maybe even interest rates might go down in the second semester of this year. We expect this sector to remain vibrant and try to make up for what they lost during the pandemic. We're also seeing manufacturing as an opportunity for many of us. You can see that the Philippines is one of the 3 economies in this chart because it's above the number 50. Okay, we remain above 50. We are one of 3, or maybe we are one of 4 countries enjoying an expansion in manufacturing. No? Whereas two of the major economies in the region are in contraction mode. No? Also, we're seeing a turnaround in the growth of loans. Despite the almost 14% growth during the latter part of 2022, we continue to see loan growth in positive territory, although only at a high single-digit level. What's encouraging is the orange portion, which is real estate, continues to be is actually seeing an acceleration after several months of shrinking contribution. You can see the orange portion was so huge and then started shrinking, is now starting to contribute more again to overall demand. So that means that while the office segment is still quite soft, many other segments in real estate are actually doing well. Talking about hotels, talking about industrial estates, talking about many types of other opportunities in real estate, those remain to be fairly vibrant. Of course, noticeable also there is the contribution of the red portion of the bar, which was practically zero in this period, now accounting for at least 15% of the growth. That's the credit card segment, no? And numbers there are like 30% for the industry, almost 40% internally for BPI. That's because unemployment rates have been very low. That means people have jobs, they've found work, and if they have work, we are confident to issue credit cards. No? Also, you will notice that the non-performing loans for credit cards have not gone up much. In fact, they've remained very, very low at around 3+%. We attribute that largely to the growing opportunities for work, as shown by the lower unemployment and underemployment rate figures. So really, so many encouraging leading indicators that lead us to believe that 2024 and 2025 will be much stronger years than 2023. Here you see the double-digit loan growth for real estate. No? That's not been seen since pre-pandemic. No? During the 2020, during this episode. Okay, so another source of optimism that we have is the deployment of OFWs actually hit a new record high of 2.3 million. So we saw a big drop in deployment during the pandemic. We are now more than recovering it. Part of it as we beat the 2019 record of 2.2 million deployment. Most of them are land-based workers. We still have a lot of seafarers joining the industry, but land-based work, especially in the medical care sector, continue to actually provide optimism on the funding of consumption in the Philippines coming from abroad. No? Again, the number last year was a solid $33.5 billion. We won't be surprised if we hit the 35 billion level this year. And again, it's funding a very good portion of Calabarzon and Central Luzon, no? Accounting for about 1/3 of the total pie. No? We're also seeing very vibrant demand for vehicles. We hit a new record high, finally, a new record high for vehicle sales last year at 440,000 units. It beat the 2017 record high of 420,000. So finally, after the train law was introduced, leading to a slowdown or a decline in vehicle demand, this year looks to be a 500,000 vehicle sales year for the Philippines. And unfortunately, this will cause traffic, but generally a good sign and a very strong sign that the Philippines is in a very strong recovery mode. Also, tourism, very optimistic that we will be back to 100% this year, with something like 7.7 to 8 million tourist arrivals for the Philippines in 2024. This will mean many industries in this tourism, travel, transportation, many of the connected industries will benefit as a result of improving outlook for tourism. But bottom line, really, the two major sources of optimism for us is inflation falling below 4% and election spending, no? Happening in the second semester of this year as people prepare for the midterm elections in 2025. So, but of course, just like the global outlook, there are upside and downside risks. On the upside first, of course, if we see a new record high of deployment for OFWs, we won't be surprised to see OFW remittances growth of as much as 5 to 7% for 2024. Of course, if the Philippine government, including the local governments, improve their spending performance, that will be a boost for 2024. No, that was a big drag to growth in 2023. We're hoping that even with fiscal consolidation in mind, if the local governments have started to learn how to carry out their tasks after 1 year of adjustment, even some major agencies like the DENR already starting to adjust to the realities of public spending, will be an upside risk for growth in 2024. But of course, there are downside risks, including the postponements in the projects of that both the government and the private sector have planned. If suddenly unemployment increases, if the global recovery is so slow in electronics, it could cause some employment issues, and some credit card defaults could result as a secondary effect of that. But again, just looking at the numbers today, these seem to be some very low probability downside risks for the Philippines. And then, of course, we were requested to talk about opportunities. I think the secretary was very clear about digitalization efforts. Also, they talked about entrepreneurial or encouraging businesses to become more entrepreneurial through their efforts in the PDP. Again, lots of programs, but for us, or at least for my team, this is where we see the opportunities. So data centers, for example, they're really growing rapidly, and it's a big opportunity for us. I think it's very crucial that we power up the sector because they want stable power, not just brute power, but very stable source of power and connectivity, because the data centers are very sensitive to fluctuations in both power and connections. So as long as we can assure that, that's a sector that we think will be very promising. add to our remittances, outsourcing, and other dollar sources in the services space. The provinces, that's another major source of optimism for us. I talked about residential properties starting to become or to go up faster than Metro Manila residential prices. This is again a phenomenon resulting from COVID. The work from home arrangement has led people to think that as long as power is reliable, as long as their connectivity is fine, and with the help of the NEDA and other government agencies, we feel that not just residents, but even tourists will want to be in the provinces more if we can assure that these infrastructures are put in place. Third is, of course, Taiwan. Taiwan is in a paranoid state, even more paranoid state now because of because the threat of China invading them. This is a threat to them, but an opportunity for Southeast Asia to partner. And we've seen the Vietnamese and the Indonesians, no, sorry, the Vietnamese and I think the Thais partner with the Taiwanese, providing chips for vehicles and similar types of electronics businesses. The Philippines appears to be lagging behind in securing these partnerships to take advantage of Taiwan's need to diversify outside its country in the face of a threat of a Chinese invasion. So really the opportunities we think here are enormous, but the Filipinos, both the public and the private sector, we feel are not taking full advantage of these threats and opportunities. And then finally, ports and other tourism-related logistics still continue to be very promising. We've seen a lot of, these cold storage facilities come up in the last 2 to 3 years. Upon our recommendation, we feel that it still has a lot of space to improve, more so with food security remaining a big issue and a big priority for government that wants to see inflation remain stable. I don't know if I'm staying within my time limit, but just a few slides on the risks. Rice continues to be a threat for inflation and can actually lead to a postponement of the BSP's rate cuts. You can see in this chart that domestic rice is now up almost 23% year on year in terms of price. That can actually continue to go up in the second quarter if the dry spell will keep prices of both Vietnam and Thai rice very high. So that could mean that in the second quarter, our inflation rate, yes, noted on the last 5 minutes. Thank you for the reminder. Here you can see that rice is building up to contribute as much as 2 percentage points of the 2.8% inflation, headline inflation that we have so far in January. As we enter the second quarter, because of the base effects resulting from slowing inflation the same time last year, we might actually see inflation go back above 4%. And this will really be a big issue for the BSP to start thinking of rate cuts. They might have to postpone it as a result of elevated rice prices. Consumer confidence remains still rather soft, but we're hoping that with lower inflation, businesses will see the opportunity that consumers can now have a better opportunity to spend more confidently on big ticket items, like washing machines, microwave ovens, and the like. Okay, so again, let me just highlight, if government is removed from the equation, we could have actually grown almost 7% in the second quarter of last year. More than 6.5% in the fourth quarter if only government numbers were removed from the GDP figures. So that tells you a lot about how big a drag they can be, and they will continue to be a risk to the outlook for 2024. So bottom line, we're super optimistic about an acceleration in growth for the Philippines this year, largely because of one, slower inflation, sustained job generation, and number three, election-related spending. So it's private sector people who will run for office in 2025 who will probably be spending a lot in the second semester of this year. So now finally for the market outlook, again, our central scenario is the Federal Reserve will cut 75 basis points this year and 75 again in 2025. That can allow the BSP to cut as well in the second semester of this year. So since late last year, in fact, since maybe early last year, we've already been saying no rate cuts in the first semester for the Philippines this year, just because the Fed will not carry out a rate cut either. The second reason is inflation might reaccelerate in 2Q because of rise. No? So the central scenario, as far as we're concerned, is both the BSP and the Federal Reserve will cut starting in the second semester, very mildly at 75 basis points through 2025. And typically, when the Fed hikes, even before the Federal Reserve starts cutting rates, the peso will already start to already have a tendency to strengthen. No? It's been proven in this episode and in this episode that prior to the cuts, the peso would tend to strengthen. And this makes us believe that the dollar peso will end below the 54 level for 2024. Again, the main assumption here is both a cut in the US and a cut in the Philippines. And if you look at the forecast of other economists based on surveys by Bloomberg, this is also expected. No? Although we are a little bit more optimistic, this table also, by the way, shows to you that a 2 to 2.5% strengthening of the peso is actually not that impressive. No? We expect that to happen, but the peso will probably underperform currencies like the Korean won, will probably underperform currencies like the Malaysian ringgit, where the appreciation of the currencies are actually expected to be faster. And again, a very big if there. If the Federal Reserve cuts in the third quarter of this year, if the BSP is able to follow, we expect our BVAL yields to inch down further. No? Although they have started to inch down since late last year, they could inch down further. But again, let me discourage you from waiting for interest rates to go down before planning to expand your businesses or your different types of businesses, because the Filipino consumer will really be seeing a strong recovery this year. And if you're not prepared for that opportunity, your competition might actually win market share over you. And hesitating to borrow because you're still waiting for interest rates to go down can actually mean a disadvantage for you. So why do we think the peso will underperform? It's because of the current account deficit of the Philippines. It's still quite wide. No? It has improved, but it remains wide. As for the interest rates going down, we don't see aggressive rate cuts on the part of the BSP because the BSP will want to rebuild the foreign reserves that they lost in the last 2 years. No? Okay, so finally, for my last couple of slides, the reserve requirement ratio will probably be lowered after the first rate cut, either late this year or early next year. And putting all of those together, this is a summary of our projections. We think growth will be slightly below the government target of 6.5%, but 6.3 will be one of the fastest again in the region, and that will be made possible by lower inflation, possibly rate cuts, and sustained decline sustained low unemployment rate in the Philippines. So let me end there by giving you our 3 key takeaways, and give me the opportunity or allow me the opportunity to thank the SNAP team for always inviting us in their events, streaming events, and giving us of course, the honor of co-presenting with the Secretary of the NEDA. Thank you and good afternoon again to everyone.
Thank you so much, sir. It's our honor also to keep inviting you to these sessions. At this point, we will once again be accommodating some questions from the audience. So to those of you who haven't submitted questions, suggestions, or comments about Sir Neri's presentation, you may do so via Slido. Let me turn you guys over once again to our moderator, Attorney Mike.
Good afternoon, Sir June Neri. I would have called you Secretary Neri as well. The namesake of our former NEDA
That's right.
director as well, right? So, Sir June, it's always a pleasure to have you participate in our Snap conversation and even in our outlooks from time to time. And again, it's like whenever we listen to you and we hear your insights on the economy, it's always like having a tour de force of the macroeconomy of the entire world, right? Because all of these things you bring back into your analysis of how we are faring in the Philippines and what are our prospects now. Now, similar to, if you may we start the questions already? There are
Go ahead. Yes, yes.
So similar to my first question to Mr. Secretary Balisacan earlier, in your point of view and honest assessment, what will be the potential impact of having a 100 peso across the board wage increase in the country right now?
Yeah, well, I generally agree with the secretary's perspective, with his opinion. We encourage increases in wages, but these have to be sector per sector, company per company. Minimum wages typically can translate to even more losses of jobs. No? So instead of benefiting our workers, a minimum wage could actually be detrimental for them. No? So we're actually seeing very good numbers for the employment figures for the Philippines. This might be reversed if we insist on seeing minimum wage instead. No? So yeah, we agree that this is actually more of a negative rather than a positive for us. No? It may actually even stoke inflation because because of this demand for higher wages, because of the requirement for higher wages, producers and service providers may be compelled to pass on the cost to the consumers. No?
Okay, so that's it. Two economists in agreement with each other. That's actually rare, but very good.
You're right.
Okay. The other thing that we want to sort of, you mentioned about the potential impact of El Nino, especially in our region, right? Not just in the Philippines, but in our region. But that's why I kept on wondering, whenever I go to Indian restaurants, why they don't serve unlimited biryani using basmati rice. It's the cost of grains, right? But kidding aside, one of the things that we've experienced so far in starting the second half of 2023 was, the El Nino phenomenon affecting the inflow of water to our reservoir. And as you're very well aware, we are really highly dependent on hydrology. But have you seen impacts of that in 2023 in the results in the economy in 2023? And what is the prospect if this continued prolonged El Nino happens beyond the expected first quarter? Because our projection was supposedly first quarter, it should be waning already. But if this extends to the second and probably the early part of the third quarter of this year, do you have any insights on that?
Yes, what we're hearing is that the El Nino that we're experiencing is a little bit milder than anticipated. No? So that's a good I guess development. But the way commodity prices, specifically rice, have been behaving worries us a little bit. Could actually increase the probability of again a spike in inflation in the second quarter of this year. No? And this is not just because actually of El Nino this year, but the fact that we're seeing the productivity of, for example, Thai rice production being affected negatively by the drying up of the Mekong River, and of course, Vietnam is also affected. So that even if we have contracts with Vietnam to import, the prices have already started to inch up. And you can see it from the chart I shared with you that year over year, these are on average around 30 to 35%. So that if we start importing heavily in the second quarter of this year, could translate to not just a 20% year-on-year increase, 22% increase in the price of rice, but even as much as 30% by the time we get to the second quarter. And that will mean BSP will again be very cautious about rate cuts. So while our assumption is they will start cutting in August, that can be delayed further if we see a more severe El Nino episode than anticipated. I hear that La Nina might take over in the second half. That's also not good news for rice production. Generally okay to have rainfall, but if it's too much rainfall, could also affect the productivity of our rice farmers.
Yeah, there you go. But of course, for hydro, we are really welcome bit of La Nina after a very long
Of
dry
course.
spell, right? Now there's a question here from Slido, which basically wants to um, you mentioned that not to expect very soon the lowering of the interest rates, right? But what's the prospect for both the local and the foreign lenders on interest rates, and any insights on that for the economy this year?
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic actually.
Yeah.
Just a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, markets were anticipating as many as 7 rate cuts from the Federal Reserve. And that would have been a total of 150 to 200 basis points, or 1.5 to 2 percentage points. But even back then, we were very skeptical that this can be delivered by the Federal Reserve, because with our own advisors in Europe and our own number crunching show that the U.S. inflation rate isn't likely to approach the 2% level anytime soon, because employment numbers in the U.S. are very strong. They've been able to generate lots of jobs, not just in January, but in February. And because of this very strong demand for workers, the cost of or the wages of Americans have remained very high. In fact, the most recent number is February wages 2024 wages compared to February of 2023 are up by 4.5%. So it's very difficult to imagine U.S. inflation falling to 3 or 2% if wage increases continue to be above 4, in fact, almost 5, 4 and at 4.5%. We think really the earliest rate cut can only be delivered in the third quarter of this year. And that the cumulative cuts will be around 50 to 100 basis points rather than 150 to 200 basis points this year. So again, that's still a lot of time waiting for us to be waiting for rate cuts. And really, the opportunities are already out there showing themselves. And again, I would always go back to the airline industry, having a backlog, preparing for the opportunities. You can just imagine from 700,000 people leaving the country, suddenly it's 2.3 million workers being deployed abroad. Just that alone, the requirement for the airline industry has really ballooned significantly. What more for domestic travelers? What more for international travelers? So they did not wait for interest rates to go down. They took advantage of the opportunity. They think that 6.5 policy rate is still reasonable. So they both, I think, PAL and Cebu Pacific carried out some sort of ordering of new aircraft starting late last year, and they continue to do so as far as I've heard early this year.
Okay, so that's very well said, June. I think our CFO is listening, and Abed, if you have any plans to do financing really soon, there you go. The other thing that probably we want to sort of tie up, you mentioned that we are the star performer in terms of inflation towards the end of 2023, I think. And um, you believe that we will do better again in 2024. I think the question really here is what are the factors that contributed to our being able to rein in control the inflation in 2023, and what's the long-term prospect for this, given that there's interest rates still high, there's a lot of uncertainty due to the El Nino and the potential impact of that to the economy. So any thoughts on that?
Yes, well, two things. On the demand side, BSP did its part. They tightened monetary policy sufficiently to fight any second round effects, to fight inflation expectations. The peso has stabilized remarkably in 2023 compared to 2022. And we really have to give BSP the credit for stabilizing both currency and demand expectations as a result of that. But there appear to have also been some supply interventions. Same time last year or same time late 2022, we saw the price of vegetables spike significantly during the December-January episodes. This was managed very well in late 2023, early 2024. And we have to give credit to better coordination among our different agencies in government. I'm not sure if the new agriculture secretary, because he's already a full-time secretary, sitting there and knowing a lot about logistics and the importance of timing, may have helped it in easing pressures for vegetable prices, specifically onions, from going up too rapidly late last year and early this year, allowing us to enjoy the lowest inflation rate for so many years at 2.8%. So, of course, that also benefited from base effects. That's why we think there could be a bit of an uptick in the second quarter, but it looks like both the demand and supply elements have been managed quite well, allowing us to enjoy on-target inflation this year. So next year will, of course, be a different challenge altogether. But so far, it looks like management on both sides, demand and supply, have been actually done well.
There you go. I think the prospect then is good in terms of inflation. We passed by, Sir June, I traveled to the north a lot, and I came from Isabela last Tuesday, and we passed by Nueva Ecija, and there's tons and tons of onions being sold on the road. So there definitely no shortage of onions. We need not import, and therefore, again, cause higher inflation. And we were also in contact with the administrator of the National Irrigation Administration, and one of the things that he shared during one of our engagement is that the impact of rice importation last year as well as early this year had been managed well because of the capacity of government to provide irrigation as well as subsidies to the farmers. And I think that's something that we all look forward to, even as we hope that more water projects, as articulated earlier by Secretary Balisacan, comes into fruition, particularly the building of new reservoir and dam for a more sustainable water supply, even in times of El Nino. So we have a lot of more questions here, but I guess that's about the time we have, Sir Juneri. Again, always a pleasure to for you to walk us through the prospects for the economy. Maraming salamat po for your time.
You're welcome. Yes, of course.
And I turn you over back to our moderator and host, Luis.
Thank
and
you,
Jean.
Attorney Mike. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thank you so much, Sir Neri and Attorney Mike. Right, really insightful exchange, Noah, and thank you so much also to our audience for being with us this afternoon and for sending your questions and comments. I hope you guys took this opportunity and made the most of, having these seasoned experts and professionals, both from the private and the public sectors, here with us talking about information, that can help us make better decisions and forge better partnerships and ultimately shape a better, more stable, and a sustainable economy for the Philippines.
Mr. Neri, please stay put as we virtually hand over the Certificate of Appreciation. SN Aboitiz Power Group awards a Certificate of Appreciation to Mr. Emilio Neri for sharing his valuable expertise and knowledge during the SNAP Conversations 2024 Economic Outlook, Projections, Programs, and Priorities, given this 22nd of February 2024, signed by SNAP's Vice President, Mr. Senen Phenomenal, and SNAP's President and CEO, Mr. Joseph S. Yu. Again, thank you, sir. Thank you to our speakers, and of course to our very own Joseph and Attorney Mike. We hope you found today's session both enlightening and enjoyable. With that, allow us, your hosts, to formally conclude our event for today.
Yes, that concludes our first ever SNAP Conversations for this year. Of course, we are anticipating more SNAP Conversations to come in the year ahead of us, so stay tuned. We will be sending a feedback form as well, so you guys can suggest topics that you would like to hear from us for our next sessions. For other updates about SNAP, its solutions and services, you may also follow our LinkedIn account. Lastly, a copy of the presentations will be provided to those who complete our feedback survey.
Our heartfelt appreciation for joining us. Once again, I am Jose Luis Salud.
And I am Jane Consolacion. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.